Now at noon, lawyers for a Cobb County man set to be executed are trying to delay that from happening. Stacey Humphreys was convicted in the 2003 murders of 2 women in Cobb County.
Atlanta News First reporter Joshua Skinner is live at the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta, where a hearing happened this morning. So Joshua, Humphreys' lawyers are centering their arguments around COVID-era policies.
Yeah, and it can be kind of confusing, but as you wade into it, today centered around 2 sets of rules for death row inmates based on COVID-era policy, and that, Humphreys' lawyers say, violates Humphreys' right to life. Now, some background here. In Georgia, executions were put on hold during the pandemic, and the state attorney general's office made an agreement with lawyers for people on death row to set the terms under which those executions could resume. A Fulton County judge did rule earlier this year that those conditions still had not been met. Now, Humphreys does not qualify for that. Therefore, Humphreys' attorneys argued today that those COVID rules violate Humphreys' right to life due to there being 2 sets of rules for death row inmates. Now, while she offered no opinion on that argument, Judge Lee Mays' line of questions to the plaintiffs can best be described as skeptical today. Now, yesterday, criminal defense attorney Joshua Schiffer, who is not tied to the case, gave his input on what he thinks might happen.
I won't be surprised if a stay is issued by the federal court, only because of the fact that death penalty litigation is so challenging, so onerous, and there are so many strong arguments. Appeals are what death penalty litigation basically are all about.
Now, Judge May did not issue a finding of any kind during the hearing. She says that will be released either later this evening or early tomorrow morning. Reporting live in downtown Atlanta, Joshua Skinner, Atlanta News First.